In the winter of 1941, a city of more than 3 million people disappeared from the world. It wasn't conquered, it was sealed. German lines to the south, Finnish armies to the north, and nothing but ice to the east. What happened here was not a battle. It was a slow execution, lasting 872 days. Tonight, we step inside the ring. Leningrad, the city of Peter the Great, the Venice of the North, the cradle of the revolution. It was a city of poets, artists, and dreamers. But to Adolf Hitler, Leningrad was an infection, a symbol of Slavic pride that had to be erased. The order from Berlin was unique in the history of warfare. Directive number 1601, it stated clearly, "We have no interest in preserving the existence of this population." Surrender was not an option, because survival was not part of the German plan. June 1941. The White Nights. The sun barely set over the Neva River. Citizens walked the boulevards, believing the war was a distant thunder. They dug trenches in the parks. They covered statues with sandbags. But they did not leave. Who would abandon Leningrad, they asked. It was their home. It was unsinkable. But by August, the German war machine arrived, not with a knock at the door, but with a stranglehold. Rail lines were severed. Roads were blocked. The last train left the station and never returned. On September 8th, the ring snapped shut, and then they burned the food. German bombers knew exactly where to aim. The WWII warehouses, holding the city's reserves of flour and sugar. The fire lasted for days. The sky turned black. Molten sugar ran into the cellars, mixing with the dirt. People stood on the rooftops and watched. They didn't know it yet, but they were watching their own death sentence, burning in the sky. November arrived, and with it, the arithmetic of death. Bread rations were cut, 500 grams, then 300, then 125. A slice of bread the size of a bar of soap, made of rye, sawdust, and cellulose. This small, black square was the only thing standing between a human being and the grave. Mothers divided it with surgical precision. Every crumb was picked up. Every crust was sacred. Money became useless. Gold became worthless. A piano was worth less than a potato. A diamond necklace could not buy a can of meat. Then, the electricity failed. The tram stopped frozen in the tracks. The water pipes burst. The city plunged into darkness and cold. Minus 30 degrees inside the apartments. People slept in coats, huddled together, saving energy. Stop moving, stop talking, just breathe. The city grew quiet, a terrifying silence broken only by the sound of sleds, dragging bodies over the snow. Hitler waited outside the gates, watching, expecting the city to eat itself, expecting chaos. But Leningrad did not riot. It simply waited and starved. In January 1942, Leningrad was no longer a city. It was a tomb made of ice. The thermometer dropped, minus 30, minus 35, then minus 40 degrees. The cold was not just weather, it was a weapon. It hunted you inside your own home. Inside the apartments, everything froze. Water turned to ice in the glasses on the bedside tables. Walls were covered in white frost, thick and glittering. People built tiny stoves called burzwika. They burned everything they had, chairs, books, violins, even the floorboards under their feet. But the fire only lasted a moment, and the cold always returned. In this darkness, there was only one connection to the world, the radio. It was never turned off, because if the radio went silent, it meant the city was dead. When there was no news, the speakers played a sound, a rhythmic, ticking beat, a metronome, tick, tick. 50 beats per minute meant safety. 150 beats meant an air raid. It was the heartbeat of Leningrad. People fell asleep to it. They woke up to it. As long as the ticking continued, they knew they were still alive. But hunger changed the way people saw the world. It was a madness, a constant, aching madness. They looked at a leather belt and saw soup. They looked at wallpaper glue and saw protein. They boiled leather boots to make a gray, sticky jelly. They ate lipstick. They ate sawdust. The human body began to consume itself. At the Haymarket, a new kind of commerce appeared, the black market. Here, the treasures of the Russian Empire were traded in the mud. A gold watch from the 19th century for a single can of meat, a masterpiece painting for a bag of sugar, a fur coat for a loaf of bread. But the most dangerous trade was for the ration cards themselves. Thieves roamed the streets, not looking for money, but looking for the small piece of paper that granted the right to eat. To lose your card was to die. There was no appeal, no mercy, just the snow and the waiting. People stopped walking, they shuffled. A simple flight of stairs became a mountain. If you fell down in the snow, you usually did not get back up, and no one had the strength to help you. Death became ordinary. It was everywhere, in the streets, in the courtyards, in the beds where entire families lay together, waiting for the end. There were no coffins. The ground was too hard to dig graves, so the dead were wrapped in white sheets and dragged through the streets on children's sleds. The city was silent. There were no cars, no birds, for they had all been eaten. No dogs barking, just the sound of the wind and the scraping of sleds on the ice. It was a world where morality had evaporated. Mothers chose which child to feed and which child to let go. And yet, in this frozen hell, the Germans did not enter. They watched through their binoculars. They saw the smoke stop rising. They saw the trams buried in snow. They thought Leningrad was dead. But inside the ice, a faint heartbeat still remained. By the spring of 1942, the city was buried under snow and silence. But inside the freezing apartments, a quiet resistance was taking place. People were too weak to fight, too weak to scream. So, they wrote. Ink became as important as bread. Diaries were found everywhere after the siege, written by professors, by factory workers, by children. They wrote to prove that they existed, to prove that they were still human. Among thousands of pages, there was one small notebook that became the symbol of the city's tragedy. It belonged to an 11-year-old girl named Tanya Savicheva. Her diary did not complain about politics. It did not describe battles. It was just a list, a timeline of death. 9 short pages, written in a child's handwriting, recording the end of her world. Page 1. Genya died on December 28th at 12 noon. Page 2. Grandma died on January 25th at 3 p.m. Page 3. Leka died on March 17th at 5 a.m. Then Uncle Vasya, then Uncle Lesha, then Mother. The final entry was written in May. 3 crushing sentences. The Savichevs are dead. Everyone is dead. Only Tanya is left. Tanya did not know it, but she was writing the indictment for history. She survived the winter, but she was already broken inside. She would die 2 years later, never knowing that her words would be carved into stone forever. While the city died inside the ring, the only hope lay across the water, Lake Ladoga. To the east, the lake had frozen solid. The Soviets called it Doroga Zhizny, the road of life, but the drivers who worked there called it the road of death. It was a highway built on ice, only a few meters thick. Beneath the wheels of the trucks was deep, black water. The wind on the lake was brutal. There was no cover. German planes hunted the trucks like wolves. They bombed the ice, trying to shatter the road. Drivers kept their doors open, not for fresh air, but so they could jump out instantly if the ice cracked and the truck began to sink. Thousands of trucks went to the bottom of the lake, taking the drivers and the food with them. But the convoys never stopped. Day and night, they drove through the blizzard, bringing flour into the city and taking women and children out. For those escaping, the ride across the ice was terrifying. They saw the sunken trucks frozen in the water. They saw the bodies of those who didn't make it. But it was the only way out of hell. Then came the thaw. The snow began to melt, and the city revealed its scars. As the ice retreated, the true cost of the winter became visible. Bodies that had been buried in the snowdrifts appeared, thousands of them, lining the streets, preserved by the cold. The survivors walked among the dead. They were ghosts themselves, thin, pale, haunted. Hitler had predicted that Leningrad would fall like a rotten fruit. He had printed invitations for a victory banquet at the Hotel Astoria, but the banquet never happened. The city was broken, it was starving, it was bleeding, but it was still standing. The siege was not over, but the worst winter in history was finally gone. Summer, 1942. The snow had melted, but the hunger remained. Hitler was furious. Leningrad was supposed to be dead, yet smoke still rose from the chimneys, and deep inside the city, a new weapon was being prepared. It was not a bomb, it was not a tank, it was a piece of music. Dmitri Shostakovich, the city's famous composer, had written a symphony, the Seventh Symphony, dedicated to his besieged city. But there was a problem. There was no one left to play it. The radio orchestra of Leningrad, once the pride of Russia, had been destroyed by starvation. When the conductor, Karl Eliasberg, called for rehearsals, only 15 musicians appeared. They were ghosts. Their skin hung loose on their bones. They were so weak, they could not hold their instruments. The brass players did not have the breath to blow the horns. The drummers collapsed during practice. Eliasberg was ruthless. He secured extra rations for them, hot soup, a little more bread. If a musician missed a rehearsal, their bread card was taken away. It was brutal, but he knew they were playing for their lives. The date was set, August 9th, 1942. This date was chosen carefully. It was the exact day Hitler had planned to hold his victory banquet at the Hotel Astoria. He had even printed the invitations. But instead of a banquet, he would get a concert. On the day of the performance, the Soviet army launched a secret operation, codenamed Squall. General Govorov ordered every artillery gun in the city to fire at the German lines. 3,000 shells were launched. Why? To silence the German guns, so the music could be heard. Inside the Grand Philharmonia Hall, the chandeliers were lit. People wore their best clothes, which now hung loosely on their starving bodies. And then the music began. It was raw, it was loud, it was the sound of war transformed into art. But the Soviet command did something else, something psychological. They set up giant loudspeakers facing the German trenches. They broadcast the symphony directly to the enemy. The German soldiers, sitting in the mud, heard the music drifting over no man's land. They expected screams. They expected silence. Instead, they heard an orchestra. Years later, German soldiers confessed, "When we heard that music, we knew we would never take Leningrad. We knew we had lost." The symphony did not break the siege physically, but it broke the German spirit. 5 months later, January 1943, the physical breakthrough finally came. Operation Iskra, the spark. The Soviet Red Army launched a massive offensive from the inside and from the outside, like a hammer striking an anvil. The fighting was ferocious, hand-to-hand combat in the snow. But on January 18th, the two Soviet fronts met. A corridor was opened, only 10 kilometers wide, but it was enough. The first train arrived a few weeks later, bringing food, bringing ammunition, bringing cats to hunt the millions of rats that had taken over the city. The siege was not fully lifted. The bombing continued for another year. But the noose was cut. Death had been cheated. Finally, in January 1944, the German army was pushed back, far away from the city gates. The silence of the blockade ended, replaced by the sound of victory salutes. 324 cannons fired into the sky, lighting up the Neva River. The survivors came out of their basements. They looked at the sky, not with fear, but with tears. 872 days, it was over. When the guns finally went silent, a strange feeling settled over Leningrad. It was not joy, it was exhaustion. The survivors walked through streets that looked like the surface of the moon. Palaces were shattered, bridges were scarred, but the most terrifying damage was not to the buildings, it was to the people. Historians still argue about the numbers, because death moved faster than the counting. Official Soviet records said 600,000 died, but the truth lies closer to 1.5 million. Let that number sink in. 1.5 million people in one city. More civilians died in the Siege of Leningrad than in the bombings of Hamburg, Dresden, Tokyo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki combined. More people died in this single city than all the American and British soldiers in the entire Second World War. Those who survived carried the shadow of the blockade forever. They suffered from what doctors called the Leningrad illness. Decades later, if a piece of bread fell on the floor, a survivor would pick it up, kiss it, and apologize to it. They never threw away food. Never. Today, if you walk through St. Petersburg, you will see the beauty of the restored city, the golden domes, the grand avenues. But if you look closer, the scars remain. On Nevsky Prospect, number 14, there is a blue sign painted on the wall. Preserved from the war. It reads, "Citizens, during artillery shelling, this side of the street is the most dangerous." People walk past it every day, buying coffee, checking their phones, living the life that millions died to protect. The Siege of Leningrad was a testament to the cruelty of man. Hitler wanted to erase a city from the map. He wanted to turn it into a lake. He wanted to make the world forget that it ever existed. But she sailed. Troy fell. Rome fell. Leningrad did not. It stands today as a monument, not of stone, but of spirit, a reminder of how much a human being can endure and still remain human. This has been the story of Leningrad, the city that refused to die. Thank you for watching Ashes of History. The past is filled with stories that must not be forgotten. Subscribe and join us next time as we uncover the next chapter